You, the skinny kid in the back row with the wrinkled shirt. Get up here. Vanessa Hart's voice cut through the Grand Opera House like a crystal blade. 2,800 guests turned in their red velvet seats. 3.4 million viewers refreshed their livestream feeds. Darnell Brooks was 11 years old. His knees locked. Did I stutter? Vanessa's smile never wavered for the cameras. Come on, sweetheart. Don't be shy. The spotlight found him. Row 3, fifth from the left, wearing a white button-down his mother had ironed twice that morning. His hands gripped the risers. She's calling me. The other 47 children in the choir stood frozen. The orchestra held. Every phone in the audience tilted upward. Vanessa extended one manicured hand, beckoning. Her signature star-studded jacket caught the light. Custom Versace, $40,000, the same one from her album cover. Let's see if those church choir kids can actually perform under pressure. The words landed like sugar-coated venom. Darnell's feet moved. One step, then another. The stage stretched endlessly before him. 80 feet of polished hardwood that cost more than his entire school's music budget. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, louder than the 12-piece orchestra waiting in the pit. Vanessa pulled him to center stage. Her grip on his shoulder was firm, possessive, the kind of touch that looked warm on camera but felt cold in person. What's your name, honey? Darnell. His voice barely reached the microphone. Darnell, she repeated, drawing it out for the audience. Sweet. Now, Darnell, I'm going to give you a chance most kids only dream about. She turned to her musical director. Give him Illuminate. The bridge. Full arrangement. A ripple moved through the crowd. Illuminate was Vanessa's signature masterpiece, the song that had won her 3 Grammys, the one with the vocal run that music professors used in textbooks to demonstrate advanced technique. The bridge required a 4-octave range and precision that took trained professionals years to master. The musical director's eyebrows lifted. Vanessa, maybe we should. Did I ask for input? Her smile never dimmed. She leaned close to Darnell, microphone tilted away from her lips, but perfectly positioned to catch his breathing. Just do your best, sweetheart. No one expects much. The audience thought it was encouragement. Darnell heard something else. The introduction began. Strings swelled. The key of E-flat major, not friendly for young voices, deliberately chosen to expose weakness. Vanessa stepped back, crossing her arms, giving him the stage the way a lion gives ground to wounded prey. What happened in the next 4 minutes didn't just prove her wrong. It ended the career she'd built on theft. 6 hours earlier, Darnell had stood outside that same opera house with his stomach churning acid. He lived in South Memphis with his grandmother and younger sister in a house where the air conditioning only worked in 2 rooms. His grandmother cleaned offices downtown, leaving at 4 a.m. and returning at 7 p.m., her knees wrapped in compression bandages that never quite helped enough. Money was always the shadow in their conversations. Can we afford it? Not until next month. Maybe never. Darnell had been singing since he was 4, standing on a plastic step stool in Rising Star Baptist Church, barely visible over the pew backs. By 6, Minister Dawkins had stopped mid-sermon to listen. By 8, she'd pulled his grandmother aside. That boy has something rare, Minister Dawkins had said. Perfect pitch. Runs that sound like he's been trained for years. His grandmother had smiled through her exhaustion. What do we do with that? Juilliard. Berkeley. Real training. A pause. It costs money we don't have. So Darnell sang at church. He sang in the struggling choir at Douglas Elementary, where the piano was missing 6 keys and the sheet music was photocopied until the notes blurred. He sang in his bedroom at night, teaching himself Stevie Wonder runs from scratchy YouTube videos on his grandmother's phone with a cracked screen. His voice was unusual, a 3 to E6, with a whistle register that appeared at age 9 and never left. He didn't know this was extraordinary. He just knew it felt like breathing. When a letter arrived saying Douglas Elementary had been chosen for Vanessa Hart's annual charity gala, the whole school erupted. 50 choir students would perform. Real stage, television cameras, national exposure. His grandmother bought him new dress pants from Goodwill, $4.50, hem by hand. Vanessa Hart was famous for these galas. One every year in a different city, always photographed with children who looked like they needed saving. The press called her a humanitarian. Her empire was built on being authentic, relatable, the voice of a generation. 4 diamond albums, 5 Grammys, endorsement deals with Apple and Mercedes. And at the center of it all was Illuminate, that impossible bridge that supposedly only she could sing. Except during sound check that afternoon, Darnell had heard something wrong. The apartment above Ming's laundromat smelled like detergent and steam, always. 3 rooms on the second floor where the floorboards creaked and the walls were thin enough to hear Mrs. Chen's television through the plaster every night at 7. Darnell had lived there since he was 6, when his mother dropped him and his sister off with a garbage bag of clothes and a promise to come back. That was 5 years ago. The promise never materialized. His grandmother never mentioned it. The apartment wasn't much. Kitchen table with 1 wobbly leg. A couch with cushions that had given up. 2 bedrooms. His grandmother took one. Darnell and his 8-year-old sister Kira shared the other. But it was theirs, and his grandmother worked herself hollow to keep it that way. She left every morning at 4 a.m., her cleaning cart rattling down the stairs, returning after dark with shoulders that slumped lower each year. Darnell learned early not to ask for things. School supplies came from donation drives. Clothes came secondhand. Dinner was often rice and whatever vegetables were cheapest that week. Music was free. It started with the radio, an old clock radio his grandmother kept on the kitchen counter, perpetually tuned to 103.5, the gospel station. Darnell would sit at that wobbly table doing homework while voices poured through the static. Yolanda Adams, Kirk Franklin, Fred Hammond. He didn't just hear the songs. He heard inside them. At 7, he could tell when the backup singer in the 3rd verse went sharp by exactly a quarter tone. At 8, he could identify that the Hammond organ was tuned half a step flat. At 9, he started hearing chord progressions in his sleep, complex structures his mind would build and rebuild like architecture made of sound. He thought everyone heard this way. The way some people see colors, he saw notes. C-sharp felt blue. E-flat felt like Tuesday morning. An augmented 5th felt like the moment right before rain. His 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had noticed him humming during silent reading. She'd asked him to stop. He didn't know he was doing it. His mind was simply playing back the melody from church that Sunday, transposing it down a major 3rd because it fit better in his range. When he tried to explain, she'd smiled and said, "That's nice, sweetie. Eyes on your book." At Douglas Elementary, the music situation was grim. The choir met twice a week in a classroom that doubled as storage. Mr. Lewis, the choir director, was a substitute teacher covering the position because the real music teacher had quit. He knew 4 songs. They sang those same 4 songs at every assembly. Darnell stood in the back row every single time. Tall kids in back, short kids in front, Mr. Lewis would say, arranging them by height like they were posing for a photograph. Never mind that Darnell was barely 5 feet. Never mind that his voice could carry over the entire group without effort. He was quiet. Quiet kids went in back. At Rising Star Baptist, Minister Dawkins saw something different. She'd pulled him aside after his first time singing with the youth choir. "How long have you been trained?" she'd asked. Trained? Darnell didn't understand the question. Voice lessons. Coaching. Someone must have taught you breath control. He'd shaken his head. "I just sing." She'd stared at him for a long moment, then asked him to sing a note. Any note. He'd chosen G above middle C. She played it on the piano. Perfect match. She played B flat. He matched it instantly. She played a complex jazz chord, F diminished 7th. He sang all 4 notes simultaneously as an arpeggio without hesitation. "You have perfect pitch," she'd said quietly. "Do you know what that means?" He didn't. She'd explained that most people, even musicians, hear notes relatively, higher or lower than what came before. He heard them absolutely, like each note had its own name, its own identity. 1 in 10,000 people could do this naturally. Darnell had gone home that night and asked his grandmother if it was true. She'd been folding laundry on the couch, her hands moving automatically through worn towels and Kira's small shirts. "Minister Dawkins knows what she's talking about," she'd said. "You've always been special with music, baby. But what do I do with it?" His grandmother had paused, a faded pillowcase in her hands. The weight of the question hung between them. Opportunity without resources, talent without access. "You keep singing," she finally said. "That's what you do. You keep singing." So he did. In the apartment above the laundromat, after homework and after putting Kira to bed, Darnell would sit by the window and practice. Not for applause or recognition. Not for scholarships he didn't know existed or stages he couldn't imagine reaching. He sang because it was the only space in his life that made sense. Where poverty didn't matter, where absence didn't ache, where his mother's missing promises couldn't touch him. In those moments, with his voice filling the small room while steam rose from the laundromat below and Mrs. Chen's television murmured through the walls, Darnell didn't feel small. He felt like himself. Complete. Whole. He didn't know this was rare either. He thought feeling whole was something everyone got to experience. At 11 years old, standing backstage at the Grand Opera House in his twice-ironed shirt, Darnell still didn't think of himself as gifted. He thought of himself as lucky. Lucky to be there, lucky to be included, lucky to stand in the back row of something bigger than himself. He had no idea that luck had nothing to do with it. And he had no idea that in less than 6 hours, the world would finally hear what Minister Dawkins had recognized years ago. What his grandmother had protected quietly. What he'd been carrying alone in that apartment above the laundromat. Note by perfect note, waiting for a moment that would refuse to let him hide anymore. Darnell wasn't supposed to be in the wings. The choir had been instructed to wait in the green room. A cramped space backstage with folding chairs and stale cookies laid out on a plastic table. Mr. Lewis had made it clear. Stay put, stay quiet, don't wander. But Darnell had needed to see. Not the audience or the grandeur of the opera house. He'd already glimpsed those during their brief stage walkthrough. He needed to hear the acoustics, understand how sound moved in this space. It was instinct the same way other kids needed to touch things to understand them. So when Mr. Lewis stepped out to argue with a stagehand about the choir's entrance cue, Darnell had slipped through a side door into the stage left wing. The space was tight, crowded with equipment cases and coiled cables. A lighting technician glanced at him but said nothing, turning back to her computer screen of color codes and timing cues. From here, Darnell could see everything. The stage stretched vast and empty under work lights. Harsh white illumination that erased all magic, revealing only the mechanics of performance. Vanessa Hart stood at center, talking with her musical director, a thin man in expensive glasses who kept nodding at everything she said. "Let's run Illuminate from the bridge," Vanessa said. Her voice carried differently without a microphone, sharper, more businesslike. "I want to check the monitor mix before the audience arrives." The musical director signaled the orchestra. 23 musicians lifted their instruments. The conductor raised his baton. Darnell pressed himself against the wall, making himself smaller, invisible. The introduction began. Strings entered first, that familiar cascading line that had been streamed 600 million times. Piano joined on the downbeat. Then brass, swelling underneath like a rising tide. Vanessa began to sing. Her voice was stunning, rich and controlled, with vibrato that rolled like honey. She moved through the verse with effortless precision, her pitch locked perfectly to the orchestral accompaniment. This was the voice that had sold 40 million albums. This was mastery. Darnell listened with every cell in his body. The song built toward the bridge. The moment everyone knew, the phrase that had become Vanessa Hart's signature, her proof of greatness. The melody climbed higher. E5, F5, G5. Then she reached for the note that had made her famous. The note that music critics called superhuman. The note that supposedly only she could sing. A sustained E6 that bent and curved through 12 full seconds of control power. It happened. The note rang out across the empty opera house, filling the space with crystalline clarity. And Darnell felt his stomach drop. Something was wrong. He couldn't name it first, couldn't articulate what his ears were screaming at him. The note was perfect, too perfect. It held at exactly E6 without the microscopic variations that human voices always contained. No breath fluctuation, No organic warmth. It was like listening to a photograph of a voice instead of the voice itself. Darnell had grown up hearing Sister Morrison sing at Rising Star Baptist, a woman in her 60s whose voice could make grown men weep. Her high notes wavered slightly, breathing with emotion, alive with imperfection. That's what made them beautiful. This note didn't breathe. It existed in a vacuum, mechanically flawless, emotionally hollow. The vibrato was too consistent, exactly 5.8 cycles per second, never varying. Human vocal cords didn't work that way. They shifted with breath pressure, with emotion, with the micro adjustments that happened when a singer truly felt what they were singing. This note felt nothing. Darnell watched Vanessa's throat, her posture, the way her mouth shaped the sound. Everything looked right, but the sound itself, the actual acoustic information hitting his ears, didn't match what he was seeing. It was like watching someone mime to a recording, except she wasn't miming. Her voice was producing sound. He could see the effort, the breath support, the physical engagement of singing. But that note, that famous, impossible note, wasn't coming from her body. It was coming from somewhere else. The phrase ended. Vanessa stepped back, slightly breathless, nodding to the musical director. Good. Let's adjust the reverb on my monitor. I need to hear myself more clearly on that final run. The orchestra relaxed. Musicians turned pages, adjusted their stance. Darnell stood frozen in the wings. He didn't know about studio technology. He'd never heard of pitch correction software or layered vocal tracks. He didn't know that modern sound systems could blend live performance with pre-recorded elements so seamlessly that even trained professionals sometimes couldn't tell the difference. He only knew what he'd heard, and what he'd heard was a lie. The lighting technician glanced at him again. "You okay, kid? You look like you've seen a ghost." Darnell nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. A ghost. Maybe that's what it was. The ghost of a note that had never existed in the first place, haunting a career built on its impossibility. Vanessa Hart's voice was extraordinary, real, trained to perfection. But that note, the note that had won her 3 Grammys, the note that had cemented her legend, the note she was about to demand an 11-year-old boy replicate in front of 3 million viewers, wasn't hers. Darnell didn't know why this mattered. He didn't know that in 4 hours, he would be standing on that same stage, under those same lights, asked to produce what Vanessa herself couldn't. He didn't know that the truth living in his ears, the perfect pitch that heard not just notes, but the honesty inside them, was about to expose more than just a vocal trick. It was about to expose everything. But standing in those wings, watching Vanessa Hart accept congratulations from her musical director for a note she hadn't truly sung, Darnell felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not judgment, just a quiet, certain knowledge. That's not real. And once you hear the difference between real and artificial, you can't unhear it, no matter how famous the lie becomes. The stage lights were hotter than Darnell had imagined. Physical heat that pressed against his skin made his starched collar stick to his neck. Under the white-hot glare, the audience disappeared into darkness. 2,800 people reduced to a wall of shadow and silence. Vanessa Hart's hand remained on his shoulder, firm, claiming, "You know what?" She turned to address the other 47 children still standing in formation behind them. Her voice carried that bright, generous tone that played so well on camera. "Let's give these other talented kids a break. You've all been standing so patiently." She gestured toward the wings with her free hand, sparkling with rings that caught the light. "Go ahead and wait backstage, darlings. I just want to work with Darnell here for a moment. One-on-one mentorship. Isn't that what this is all about?" The other children looked at each other, uncertain. Mr. Lewis appeared from the wings, nodding encouragement. They filed off stage left in a confused, shuffling line. Darnell watched them go, watched his classmate Jamal mouth "good luck" before disappearing into the darkness. The stage felt enormous now. Just him and Vanessa and 80 feet of polished hardwood stretching in every direction. "There we go. Much better." Vanessa smiled out at the audience. "Now we can really focus." I love these moments, discovering raw talent, seeing what young people can do when given a real opportunity. Polite applause rippled through the opera house. She turned back to Darnell, and her voice shifted, still bright, still smiling, but with an edge underneath like sugar coating a blade. So, Darnell, do you think you can sing? It wasn't really a question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, she repeated, drawing it out slightly. So polite and humble. I appreciate that. She looked at her musical director. James, let's give him Illuminate. The bridge section we just rehearsed. Full orchestra. A murmur moved through the crowd. Several people shifted in their seats. In a front row, a woman in pearls leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her hand. James, the musical director, hesitated. His fingers tapped against his tablet. Vanessa, the range on that bridge is exceptionally difficult. Maybe we could start with something more age-appropriate. Did I ask for alternatives? Vanessa's smile never flickered, but her voice dropped half a degree. This is my gala, James. My stage. And I think Darnell here is brave enough to try. Aren't you, sweetheart? Darnell's mouth had gone dry. Illuminate. The song he'd heard her rehearse. The song with the impossible note that wasn't real. I could try, he said quietly. Of course you can. That's the spirit. Vanessa squeezed his shoulder once, then released him, stepping back to give him space. The movement looked generous, supportive, but her eyes told a different story. The orchestra prepared. Sheet music rustled. The conductor lifted his baton, waiting for the signal. Vanessa moved closer to Darnell one final time. She bent down slightly, her face near his, her voice dropping to a whisper that the audience couldn't hear. But his microphone, still live, caught every word. Listen to me carefully, sweetheart. Her breath smelled like mint and something chemical. When you get to the hard part, and you'll get to it, just fake it. Move your mouth. We'll keep the music going. No one will blame an 11-year-old for not being able to hit notes that took me years of professional training. Understand? She straightened, her public smile returning. Just do your best, she said loudly for the cameras. That's all anyone can ask. The audience responded with encouraging applause. Supportive. Kind. They thought they were watching a superstar give an opportunity to an underprivileged child. A heartwarming moment of mentorship and generosity. They had no idea they were watching a trap being set. Darnell stood alone at center stage. His hands hung at his sides. His heart hammered against his ribs, so hard he thought the microphone might pick it up. The conductor raised his baton higher. In the wings, he could see Mr. Lewis watching nervously. Behind him, Jamal and the others crowded together, trying to see. In the audience, somewhere in that wall of darkness, were people with phones recording everything. People who would post this online within minutes. People who would judge him, remember him, reduce him to a viral moment. Success or failure, nothing in between. Vanessa had moved to the side of the stage, arms crossed, waiting. Her expression was patient, expectant, already knowing how this would end. Just fake it when it gets hard. She wanted him to fail. No, she expected him to fail. This entire moment was designed to prove something. That talent without training meant nothing. That children from places like Douglas Elementary didn't belong on stages like this. That the distance between her world and his was insurmountable. She expected him to shrink, to mime his way through the hard parts and slink off stage while she offered consoling words about effort and try your best. The audience would applaud his courage. She would look generous, and everything would stay exactly as it was. The conductor's baton hung, suspended in the air, waiting. Darnell could feel every eye in the opera house on him, could feel the weight of those 3.4 million livestream viewers watching through screens, could feel his grandmother somewhere across the city, probably on her cleaning route, unaware that her grandson was standing under lights that cost more than their entire apartment building. He thought about the apartment above the laundromat, about singing by the window while steam rose from below, about Minister Dawkins telling him he was 1 in 10,000, about the note he'd heard during rehearsal, the beautiful, hollow, artificial note that had made Vanessa Hart famous. That's not real, but this moment was real. His voice was real, and he had a choice. He could shrink, mom through the hard parts, protect himself from failure by never truly trying. Or he could sing, actually sing, the way he sang in that small room above Ming's laundromat, the way he sang at Rising Star Baptist with Minister Dawkins watching, the way he sang when no one was judging, when music was just breath and truth and the sound of being alive. The conductor looked at him, waiting for some signal, fear, readiness, anything. Darnell took one breath. Then he nodded. The baton fell. The orchestra began, and Darnell decided not to shrink. The orchestra swelled around him like a living thing. Strings painted the air with light. Piano filled the spaces between heartbeats. Brass built underneath, a foundation of control power. Darnell opened his mouth and sang. Not the tentative, apologetic sound Vanessa expected. Not the thin, childish voice the audience assumed would emerge. His voice cut through the orchestra like sunlight through water. Clear, pure, startlingly mature for an 11-year-old body. He moved through the first verse of Illuminate with quiet precision. His pitch locked perfectly to the accompaniment, not because he was listening to the instruments, but because his mind knew where the notes lived. E-flat major felt like a specific color to him, and he simply stepped into it. In the wings, Mr. Lewis's mouth fell open. In the front row, the woman in pearls sat up straighter. At the side of the stage, Vanessa's arms uncrossed. Her expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. The confident smile thinned at the edges. The verse ended. The pre-chorus climbed. Darnell's voice climbed with it, gaining strength with each phrase. He wasn't performing. He was doing what he'd done 1,000 times in that small apartment above the laundromat. He was breathing truth into melody. The bridge approached. The musicians felt it coming. The conductor's shoulders tensed. This was the moment, the phrase that had sold 40 million albums, the 12 seconds that had built an empire. The backing track engaged. Subtly, woven so carefully into the orchestral mix that most people never noticed the scene between live performance and pre-recorded enhancement. It was designed to support Vanessa's voice during the impossible section, blending her live vocals with a studio-perfect version of that famous high note. The orchestra dropped away. Just piano now, sparse chords creating space for the voice to soar. Darnell reached the phrase, "And I'll rise above the shadows into light." The melody climbed. E5, F5, G5, then higher. The backing track was there, ready to carry the moment, ready to provide the safety net it always provided. But Darnell didn't need it. His voice lifted, not straining, not reaching, simply going where the melody required. A 5, C6. His throat relaxed. His soft palate lifted. The sound that emerged was crystalline, effortless, inhuman in its purity, but undeniably, completely human in its source. He hit E6, not the locked, mechanical E6 from the backing track. A real E6, breathing and alive, microscopic variations rippling through it like wind across water. His voice carried emotion the pre-recorded version couldn't contain. Vulnerability, hope, something raw and undefended. The sound engineers in the booth looked at each other, confused. On their monitors, the waveforms showed something impossible. The live input was clearer, stronger than the backing track. One engineer's hand moved toward a fader, uncertain whether to lower the track or raise it. In the audience, phones stopped recording and simply watched. The note held. 6 seconds, 8 seconds, and then Darnell did something that changed everything. He heard it, the way he'd heard it during rehearsal. The note was correct technically, but it wasn't right. The melody wanted to bend, to curve upward with emotional logic rather than mechanical precision. The song was about transcendence, about breaking free, and this moment, this peak, shouldn't sit static. It should reach. Instinctively, without conscious decision, Darnell's voice slid upward. Not a full step, just a quarter tone, then half. The note bloomed from E6 toward F6, hovering in that space between fixed pitches where emotion lives, where the raw human voice operates outside the rigid rules of equal temperament. It shouldn't have been possible. 11-year-old boys don't have the vocal control for quarter tone adjustments. They don't have the musical intuition to reharmonize a melody in real time. They don't have the courage to correct a song that 600 million people know by heart. But Darnell wasn't correcting the song. He was correcting the lie. The backing track, still running, suddenly sounded wrong. Its mechanical perfection clashed with his organic truth. The scene between artificial and real became obvious, glaring, impossible to ignore. In the sound booth, an engineer made a decision. His hand slammed the fader down. The backing track cut out completely. Just Darnell now. Just his voice, naked and unenhanced, filling the Grand Opera House with a sound it had never contained before. The note continued. 10 seconds, 11, 12, and then he released it, letting it fall into the final phrase with a descending run that was entirely his own. Not Vanessa's interpretation. Not the album version. His. The orchestra stumbled back in, half a beat late. Musicians physically shaken by what they'd just witnessed. Darnell sang the final line. His voice settled back into his chest register, the melody resolving to tonic with simple, devastating clarity. The last piano chord decayed into silence. The Grand Opera House held its breath. 2,800 people sat frozen. In a live stream, 3.4 million viewers stared at their screens, unsure if what they'd just heard had actually happened. Darnell stood under the lights, his heart pounding, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't know what he'd done. He only knew he'd sung the truth. In the wings, Mr. Lewis had tears on his face. In the front row, the woman in pearls gripped her companion's arm so tightly her knuckles had gone white. At the side of the stage, Vanessa Hart stood perfectly still. Her face had drained of color beneath her makeup. Her hands hung at her sides, empty of the gesture or movement that usually came so easily. She was staring at Darnell like he'd just spoken a language she didn't know existed. Like he'd just revealed that everything she'd built, everything she'd claimed, everything she'd become famous for, had been available to anyone willing to tell the truth. The silence stretched. 1 second, 3 seconds, 5. Then someone on the balcony started clapping. A single person, then another, then a section, then a wave of sound that crashed over the opera house like a dam breaking. Not polite applause, not encouraging support, but shock and recognition and a visceral response to witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. The standing ovation built like thunder. And in the sound booth, an engineer looked at his colleague and said the words that would be repeated 10 million times online within the next 6 hours. Did we just record that? On stage, Darnell stood very still, watching the lights blur through sudden tears. He had told the truth, and the truth had just destroyed a legend. The applause rolled like thunder, but Darnell barely heard it. His ears were still ringing with the last note he'd sung, the honest one, the one that had felt right even though it had deviated from what was written. Vanessa moved across the stage toward him, her heels clicking against the hardwood. Her smile was back in place, but looked painted on now. Fragile. She wrapped one arm around his shoulders, turning them both to face the audience as cameras flashed from every direction. Well, her voice projected over the dying applause, too bright, too loud. That was certainly something. Give him another hand, everyone. The audience responded obediently. Darnell stood stiffly under her arm, unsure what to do. Vanessa kept that grip on his shoulder, her fingers pressing just slightly too hard. She pulled the microphone closer to her mouth. You know, Darnell, that was a very interesting interpretation of the bridge. Very creative. Something in her tone made the word creative sound like an insult. Darnell looked up at her, confused. I just sang where the note wanted to go. Where the note wanted to go. Vanessa's laugh came out sharp. That's adorable. But the note is written as E6, sweetheart. That's the composition. That's what makes it. But it wasn't E6, Darnell said. The words came out simply, without accusation. Just a statement of fact. Vanessa's smile froze. Excuse me. During the rehearsal, when you sang it before, Darnell's voice was still amplified, still broadcasting across the entire opera house and to 3.4 million viewers beyond. He didn't understand he should stop talking. He only understood what he'd heard. The note was E6, but it was flat. Not flat exactly, but it wasn't moving. It sat there. Real voices don't do that. They breathe. A ripple moved through the audience. Murmurs. Shifting. In the wings, Mr. Lewis made a small, frightened sound. Vanessa's arm dropped from Darnell's shoulder. She took a small step back, her expression flickering between confusion and something harder. I don't think you understand how professional recording works, honey. There are technical elements. I know it was recorded. Darnell continued, still innocent, still just explaining what his ears had told him. That's why it sounded like that. The backing track, right? It's really good. Most people probably can't tell. But the note you sang live was different from the note in the track. You stopped around. He hummed briefly, finding the pitch in his mind. Around D6? Maybe D sharp. Then the recording took over. Complete silence now. 2,800 people holding their breath. Vanessa Hart's face had gone pale beneath her stage makeup. Her hands clenched at her sides. When she spoke, her voice had lost all its warmth. That's a very serious accusation from someone who doesn't understand the complexity of live performance. I'm not accusing. Darnell started, but she cut him off. No, it's fine. Her laugh was too loud, brittle. If you think it's so easy, if you think I need assistance hitting my own signature note, she turned to the musical director. James, kill the backing track. All of it. James looked stricken. Vanessa, I don't think. Kill it. Now. The musical director made a gesture to the sound booth. Through the monitors, engineers could be seen frantically adjusting settings. Vanessa turned back to the audience, her smile wide and terrible. Let's settle this right now. No tracks, no assistants, just me and the orchestra, the way it's always been. She looked at Darnell. Step back, sweetheart. Let me show you how a professional does it. Darnell moved to the side of the stage, clutching the microphone stand for balance. His stomach churned. This wasn't what he'd meant. He hadn't been trying to challenge her. He'd just been explaining what he'd heard. The orchestra prepared. The conductor looked uncertain, but raised his baton. Vanessa positioned herself at center stage. She took a breath, rolled her shoulders back, lifted her chin. The posture of absolute confidence. The posture that had graced 1,000 magazine covers. From the bridge, she commanded. The music began. She sang the verse leading into the bridge, still strong, still technically proficient. Her voice was genuinely remarkable. But as the phrase climbed toward that famous moment, something changed in her body language. A tension entered her shoulders. Her jaw tightened. The orchestra fell away. Just piano now. Vanessa reached for the note. Her voice lifted. E5, F5, G5, A5, C6. Then she pushed for E6. Her voice cracked. Not subtly. Not the kind of small break that happens to every singer occasionally. A full, audible, unmistakable crack. Her voice splitting between chest and head register. The sound fragmenting into breathiness and strain. She tried to recover, tried to push through to the note. Her face reddened with effort. Her neck muscles stood out like cords. The sound that emerged was D6, strained and unstable, wavering with visible effort. Nothing like the note she was famous for. Nothing like the note Darnell had sung minutes earlier. She held it for maybe 4 seconds before her breath gave out completely. The note died into silence. Vanessa stood there, chest heaving, her perfect image cracking like ice. In the audience, phones rose by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Every person recording, realizing they were witnessing something that would break the internet within the hour. The silence was absolute, crushing. No one applauded. No one moved. Vanessa Hart, 3-time Grammy winner, voice of a generation, sold-out tours in 47 countries, had just failed publicly to hit the note that had made her famous. The note an 11-year-old boy had hit effortlessly 30 seconds into being put on the spot. The conductor didn't know whether to continue. The orchestra sat frozen, instruments ready, waiting for direction that didn't come. Vanessa's microphone picked up her breathing, ragged, too fast. Her hands trembled at her sides. Darnell stood in the wings, watching her fall apart, and felt something break inside his chest. Not triumph, not vindication, just the terrible weight of truth. He hadn't meant to expose her. He'd only meant to explain what he'd heard. But the difference between what she'd claimed and what she could actually do had been revealed in the cruelest possible way. Not through investigation or journalism or careful analysis, but through simple, honest comparison. His voice next to hers, the real next to the manufactured, the truth next to the lie. Vanessa's eyes found his across the stage. For one moment, they looked at each other, the superstar and the child from the apartment above the laundromat. And in that moment, they both understood. Everything she'd built on that impossible note was about to collapse. And an 11-year-old boy with perfect pitch had just lit the match. Not with malice, not with intention, just by singing honestly, just by telling the truth. The phones kept recording. The silence kept growing. And somewhere in the sound booth, an engineer pressed save on the audio file that would be downloaded 47 million times in the next 72 hours. The file that would end a career and launch another. The microphone hit the stage with a sharp crack that echoed through the opera house speakers. A gunshot of sound that made everyone flinch. Vanessa Hart didn't pick it up. She turned, her star-studded jacket catching the lights one final time, and walked off stage right. Not gracefully, not with the measured confidence that had carried her through 1,000 performances. She walked like someone fleeing a fire, her heels clicking frantically against the hardwood, faster and faster until she disappeared into the wings. The audience heard her voice from backstage, muffled but unmistakable. "Get me out of here. Now." Then silence. Darnell stood alone at center stage, the abandoned microphone rolling slowly toward the orchestra pit. His heart hammered against his ribs. His hands had gone numb. "I'm in trouble." That was his first thought. His only thought. He'd done something wrong. He'd embarrassed a famous person. He'd ruined the gala. His grandmother would be called. The school would be blamed. Everything would be his fault. He looked toward the wings, searching for Mr. Lewis, for any adult who could tell him what to do next. But before he could move, something happened. Someone in the balcony, the same person who'd started the applause after his performance, stood up. Then another person stood, and another. The wave began in the upper levels and cascaded downward. Row by row, section by section, 2,800 people rose to their feet. Not politely, not out of obligation. They stood because they'd witnessed something true. The applause started small, then built like a storm. It rolled through the Grand Opera House in waves, louder, harder, more insistent. People weren't just clapping. They were shouting, whistling. Some were crying. In the front row, the woman in pearls had tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed to her mouth. In the wings, Mr. Lewis was openly sobbing, one hand gripping the curtain for support. Darnell stood frozen in the center of it all, unable to process what was happening. The lights were too bright. The sound was too loud. His mind couldn't reconcile the disaster he thought he'd caused with the response he was receiving. A stagehand gently guided him off stage, away from the lights, back to where the other choir members stood in shocked silence. Jamal grabbed his arm, eyes wide. Dude, do you know what you just did?" Darnell shook his head. He didn't know. He didn't know anything except that his legs were shaking and he needed to sit down. The story broke online in 14 minutes. #Vanessa Exposed trended worldwide in 43. By morning, every major music publication had published analysis pieces. Audio engineers dissected recordings of Illuminate spanning 7 years, showing the precise moment in each live performance where Vanessa's natural voice cut out and the backing track engaged. Rolling Stone ran a technical breakdown with waveform comparisons. The New York Times interviewed vocal coaches who explained that Vanessa Hart's claim to fame had been physically impossible. Her vocal range, as demonstrated in multiple verified live performances over the years, simply didn't extend to E6 without technological assistance. She hadn't been lying about being a good singer. Her voice was legitimately extraordinary. But the note that had made her legendary, the note she'd built an empire on, had never been hers. Vanessa's legal team moved fast. Cease and desist letters. Threats of defamation lawsuits. They sent a particularly aggressive letter to Darnell's grandmother, demanding the family sign a non-disclosure agreement and cease all public comment. Darnell's grandmother read the letter at the kitchen table in their apartment above the laundromat. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer, and made a phone call to Minister Dawkins. "They're trying to silence my grandson for telling the truth," she said quietly. Minister Dawkins made 3 more phone calls. Within 6 hours, the ACLU had contacted them. A civil rights attorney offered pro bono representation. The story shifted from music industry scandal to something larger, a powerful celebrity trying to intimidate a child and his family into silence. Public opinion turned decisively. Support poured in from unexpected places. Other musicians began sharing their own stories of industry pressure, a manipulation of the distance between image and reality. Several prominent artists publicly defended Darnell, calling him brave, honest, a reminder of why music mattered. Vanessa's team backed down. The legal threats evaporated. Her publicist released a statement about creative differences and taking time to focus on personal growth. 3 weeks later, Vanessa Hart quietly retired from public performance, citing vocal health concerns. Darnell didn't become famous the way Vanessa had been famous. He didn't want that. But opportunities came. A scholarship to a performing arts program. Voice lessons with a renowned coach who worked with him remotely, refusing payment. Invitations to sing at events that actually honored his gift rather than exploiting it. His grandmother kept him grounded. School came first. Family came second. Music came when it was honest. 6 months after that night at the Grand Opera House, Darnell sang at Rising Star Baptist's Easter service. Just him and the piano, a simple hymn his grandmother had requested. No orchestra, no stage lights, no cameras, just his voice filling the small church with truth. Minister Dawkins watched from the front pew, tears in her eyes, thinking about the little boy who'd stood on a step stool at age 4, and the young man he was becoming. Someone who understood that the greatest gift wasn't vocal range or technical perfection. It was the courage to sing honestly, even when honesty destroys legends. Even when truth costs more than silence. Even when the whole world is watching. The story of Vanessa Hart and Darnell Brooks spread across the internet for months, dissected and debated and transformed into a symbol, not of revenge or schadenfreude, but of something simpler and more profound. That truth, spoken without malice, is more powerful than any fabricated perfection. That honesty, even from the smallest voice, can outshout the loudest lie. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when you don't understand the consequences. Especially when you don't understand the consequences. The live stream from that night has been viewed 127 million times. People don't watch it for the scandal. They watch it for the moment when an 11-year-old boy, standing alone under lights that cost more than his grandmother's annual salary, decided not to fake it. Decided not to shrink, decided to sing. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt small under bright lights, if you've ever had to choose between safety and truth, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their honest voice matters more than someone else's perfect lie. Share it with someone who thinks they're not ready, not trained enough, not good enough. Because somewhere tonight, there's a kid sitting in a small room above a laundromat, singing by a window, believing their voice doesn't matter. Prove them wrong. Comment below. What truth are you afraid to sing? What note are you pretending you can't hit? Your voice matters, even if it cracks, especially if it's real. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and never let anyone convince you that their manufactured perfection is better than your honest truth. Because it's not. It never was. And somewhere an 11-year-old boy just proved it.